is how do they sustain the relationship? It's the sustainability relationship is where they're learning to go do. We as mass marketers, we as fast-moving consumer goods marketers, don't even know how to begin to form relationships, much less sustain them and develop them over time. But the not-for-profit world is a great place to go look. We've got time for 2 more questions. We can play trumpets while you're...
Yeah, that's great. Sorry about that. So I'm actually a case study of your schema disruption from the standpoint I heard your presentation at the first reunion about connectors, and your credibility went up a little. And, and I saw your second one about schema disruption, and actually I started talking about it to clients and building off of it, and as a good consultant, charging off of it. So the question is, where do you learn more in terms of the academic side of it? So, you know, I've read a couple books about conceptual blends. I've read a couple books of cognitive science. So I just want to see where are the thought leaders in your mind in those 40 years of great learning?
There's a couple places that I would start. Chip and Dan Heath. Those of you know Chip and Dan, one's a professor at Duke, one's a professor at Stanford, brothers. Twins, I think. They wrote a book a couple years ago called Made to Stick, which articulates some of these principles. You got to kind of dig through them. But that's a book that I would start with because I think it really begins to articulate some things. Dan Ariely, brilliant cognitive psychologist, who wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. He's written a second one. The first book is much better than the second one. But Predictably Irrational talks about how we take things which are absolutely irrational on the surface, but we can predict that people do them every single time. And what are those things? 2 really, really good places to start. And then if you're more interested, I've got a professor at the University of Texas that I work very closely with that I still want to cut on his daily rate because I'm recommending it to so many people. So those would be the places I would start.
Excellent, thank you. And I will say taking these paradigms or these schemas applies tremendously well to some of the greatest consumer goods innovations in the last 5 years.
It does.
So thank you.
Yeah, many of you do this intuitively. All right, I am getting the hook sign. I got one more minute. So one more question? Yes, sir.
Under traditional media planning, okay, we are concerned about frequency, okay? Given that the clutter, the fragmented media that we are in right now, and given that the Procter & Gamble is into fast-moving consumer goods, okay, how many times, okay? What is the number of exposure to create a good relationship or, with our consumers or with our target market?
Right, and I would argue that what you just did is frame that question in the reach-based marketing filter. How many exposures do I have to have the consumer? As opposed to, how many conversations do I have to have with the consumer? And if you started thinking on conversations instead of exposures, how many times do I have to push something onto you and you see it, instead of saying, how many times do we have to just talk with each other? Then you'd begin to change. Because then the answer to that question varies tremendously. Because it is the quality of the conversation, it is the frequency of the conversation, but it's also the intensity of the conversation and the trust that gets built up in the conversation. And those aren't measurable in our media metrics of today. This is why I so encourage you to pilot work, because you have to go learn this stuff. There are measures on all of this stuff, by the way. There are KPIs on all this stuff, and Boston's done an unbelievable job setting up the KPIs. The problem with them is you're going to look and say, I had 4 engagements with this consumer this week. Is that good? Should it have been 3, and so therefore I'm indexing ahead of schedule? Or should it have been 7? I don't know. You have to learn that over time. So these measures in these KPIs are going to be very, very different, and we will get there. Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me.